All right, in just a moment, we're going to take a sort of deep dive into the criminal justice system and keeping kids out of it. But right now, we're going to get you up to speed on some juvenile justice numbers for the U.S. First slide here, we're going to be looking at the types of arrests. Now, from 2003 till 2008, you can see arrest rates decreased from by some 24% for public drunkenness, 27% for driving under the influence, and 8% for vandalism. Violent crimes also decreased, with about 27% down for rape, 9% for murder, and 50% for motor vehicle theft. But another interesting trend there, rates for robbery actually increased by some 25%. I think that's the iPhone effect. Moving on, race and ethnicity. While the majority of juveniles entering the justice system from 2003 till 8 were African American, African Americans only constitute about 16% of the U.S. juvenile population. So that disparity is pretty apparent, especially when you go on and compare to their peers who committed similar offenses. African American juveniles were more likely to be sentenced to placement facilities. Going to take you one more. Girls in juvenile justice. Now, these numbers are really daunting. 42% are 15 or younger, compared to 31% for boys. 18% of those young women in the facilities are jailed for status offenses like cutting school, truancy, runaway violations, and curfew. Boys, 4%. So another number that's really interesting is girls constitute 11% of the incarcerated population, but were the victims of 34% of substantiated abuse cases. Got another slide to show you really how bad it is for young women out there. 92% of these young women have experienced one or more forms of physical, sexual, and/or mental abuse. 45% have been beaten or burned at least once. 40% had some sexual trauma. 32% of these young women have a sexually transmitted disease, and that same number have chronic health problems. And perhaps the most startling number of all, girls are 11 times more likely to die while incarcerated. So taking you back to our title slide here, just a little look at juvenile justice here in the U.S. And now we're going to have the A block.
So we've just heard some interesting stats that reflect the size and scopes of the problem. In a moment, some Brooklyn-based experts who are working towards solutions to those problems. But first, let's give a handful of local teams from Bed-Stuy, all of them members of youth organizing to save our streets, their own chance to be heard.
You know what I hate now? When back then I was little, I used to go to the park by myself, play around, do whatever I could do. Now my mother, no, you can't go there. I'm going around the corner. Jabari, don't go. I'm scared. Like, leave me alone.
It's scary.
Man.
You don't know. You could walk outside and something happen to you.
Tomorrow's not promised.
Life now.
My name is Cadell Smith. I'm 16. I go to Erasmus Hall.
I don't know
change stereotypes, cause like cops, I got stopped and frisked by cops a couple of times, and like they only think of just because of the way I dress, I'm a hood boy, or I'm in a gang, or I affiliate myself with gangs. But little do they know I take Brooklyn college classes. I have 40 credits as a junior. Like, I'm pretty good in school. Just because I dress, just because of the way I dress, they think that I'm a bad kid or something. Like, it's not good to stereotype people.
With us now are representatives of two organizations that are fighting to help local teenagers avoid getting caught up in the criminal justice system. Returning to BK Live is Kenton Kirby, Director of Trauma Support Services at the Crown Heights Mediation Center. Nice to have you back, sir.
Thank you.
And from the Brooklyn Community Foundation, Prachi Patankar is the Senior Program Officer overseeing the organization's grant-making strategy. Welcome to BK Live.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, so both of you are working with projects that, well, we hope will have a positive impact on the startling statistics that Brian just shared with us. Can you tell us about your project and what solutions that you offer?
Okay. Okay, so with the Crown Heights Community Mediation Center, we run a number of different projects engaging the youth in our community. We have our largest project is our Save Our Streets project, which is a public health approach to dealing with gun violence. We also run the Youth Organizers Save Our Streets program, which mobilizes youth leaders to kind of spread the word of anti-gun violence, of increasing gun violence. We also run a program called Make It Happen, and that is a more therapeutic program to help young men of color between the ages of 16 and 24 heal from their own history of community violence, whether it be directly or indirectly impacted.
So Prachi, the Brooklyn Community Foundation has helped a lot of worthy organizations keep the lights on for a long time. I just wondered, when you guys are in this granting process, how you weigh these programs and look at what some consider maybe a radical approach to fighting a really epidemic problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Brooklyn Community Foundation has a charge to create long-lasting change so that the Brooklyn borough is fair and just in the long term, right? And so for us, it's really supporting the leadership of the young people of Brooklyn, because that's where the biggest opportunity, they represent the biggest opportunity for people in Brooklyn, right? And we know that, even though young people of color, Black and Latino young people make 57% of the population in Brooklyn, over 90% of them are in juvenile justice programs. So some of the statistics you talked about, those are really real when it comes to the lives of Brooklyn's young people, and especially young people of color. So we are really supporting programs that are supporting that leadership and transformative potential of young people. And for youth justice, we know that there's structural racism and structural inequities that exist, and what are the programs that really are challenging that at the core. So programs like the Mediation Center, where they're supporting the leadership of neighborhood-based young people, programs like Center for New Leadership that are at the core is to really think about diverting arrests, where young people are not really having an immediate record right away as soon as they're arrested. So they're not even arrested. And so that's what they're looking at, and they're really pairing up with the probation office as well as the local precinct.
I have to ask you, what does success look like to you when you look at what are the sort of benchmarks that you hold the people that you're working with to? Because it's such a systemic problem, it's such a large problem, it's such a daunting task. How do you know when you're truly making a difference?
So for us, we have to be mindful of how the system's already kind of in a place to kind of keep a lot of our clients down, essentially. So we measure success from like a micro level with our clients. How can we take our young men, how can our young men navigate the world that they're in that's already kind of set up to help them fail? So if I have a young man who's has constant conflicts in his community, there's generational poverty and lack of positive figures in his life, how do I help this young man navigate the world that he comes out relatively unscathed? For us, we look at healing as a process. There's going to be ups and downs, and a lot of times, a lot of programs that a lot of our clients are mandated to, they really don't hear their voices. So a lot of for us, successes are young men having a voice, feeling that they're validated in their experiences. And for us, also getting larger entities to start looking at our young men from a different lens. So one of the things we actually are putting together is this conference at the end of the month, April 25th, called Paving the Way to Healing and Recovery. And this is a conference to convene young men, youth, practitioners, people that are interested in kind of changing the narrative for young men of color being impacted by crime. So
I know that a lot of the program is based on sort of a pilot that was in Chicago, where they are fighting systems with a very systematic sort of public health approach that looks at things holistically. So how important is a thing like this conference, where people can share more best practices and sort of learn from what's working in other places?
Well, a colleague of mine actually made a really great point. She said, we're all trying to get into the same room, but from 9 different doors. And I think a conference like this is a way for all of us to figure out, okay, this is the door that we go through. Gotcha. What are those other doors? For us, with our Save Our Streets program, that's kind of, they're on the ground, they're connecting with what we call high-risk individuals who are engaging in gun activity. And our Make It Happen program is more kind of healing and kind of therapeutic work. So there are 2 different doors. They're stopping retaliations and shootings, and then in the Make It Happen program, we help in regards to helping their healing. So we have all these different places out here. We can name all the programs in Brooklyn. all different doors trying to get into the same space. So we're trying to convene everybody. That's a great way to do it.
Good room
It's
to
a
be
great
in.
way to look at it. And to that end, all of these opportunities absolutely need funding. Can you tell us about some of the organizations that you've sort of helped funnel money to, and how important the grant writing strategy is in social justice reform?
Sure. I think one of the programs that I would like to talk about is we have a partnership with the Department of Education as well as the Mayor's Office, where we are supporting 4 schools in Brooklyn where 4 nonprofits are bringing a full-time restorative justice coordinator in these 4 schools. So as we know, the suspension rates in New York City schools are at an extremely high rate. So if you have 70% of population of Black and Latino young people in schools, 95% of those young people are getting suspended on a day-to-day basis. And this is just unacceptable. And what that means is that we need to really change this climate and the culture of the school where young people are not feeling like they're criminalized and that they have an agency and voice in what happens to their future. So the restorative justice program is looking at really thinking about blurring the boundary of, who is it that is creating the harm and who is the victim of that harm. So instead of a young person who gets into a fight, having them suspended right away, these restorative justice programs are looking at creating a conversation among those 2 people and the school community, so you really find out what is going on behind why these fights or whatever is happening is happening.
So that really almost begs the question of, we need to write a grant to get what seems like a common sense thing. If you see 2 kids beefing in the hall, like, you sit here, what's happening? Like, that's something that requires
Or are we
beyond.
sort of seeing a change in just the way we look at people? Like I was saying, when we were talking earlier, when I was young, I was sort of guilty as well because I got good grades and my parents were really involved and I was really involved in my church. So I said I was one of those good kids, you know what I mean? And so I looked at people who sort of got in trouble and I was like, well, those are the bad kids. But when I got older, I realized that these were just my friends and that we as a community were being targeted.
Yeah.
And so it sort of changes. Like we've seen the research that says, we're disproportionately putting students in it's punishment rather than sort of development when it doesn't happen in other communities. Is this all in sort of a response to that?
Oh, definitely. It's in response to kind of immediately jumping to punitive measures and really understanding that young people at the age that they are, anywhere you go, they have mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes at that age, but there are certain young people who have more punitive practices for those mistakes versus some other people. Yeah. So that really requires changing the culture of the staff, the teachers, the leadership of the school, and that has because of the way that the system has been in place, where you have young people are entering schools with metal detectors. At the get-go, they're feeling criminalized. Then you go into school, and any kind of small mistake you have, you are immediately taken out of school. So what that means is that their graduation rates, what happens to their just schooling, is automatically, when you're out of school, that takes you back many steps. So when you create programs like this, it takes a long time, but at least you are respecting young people for who they are, rather than having them criminalized from the very beginning, from a small age, where they're criminalized in school, where they're criminalized on the streets, when they're walking down the streets, where they're being arrested. So really, that conversation around school to prison pipeline is stopping that from happening from the school in the first place.
So our last 60 seconds are yours.
All right, well, I mean, when I hear this, it speaks to a lot of work that I do with our Make It Happen program. So I want to share a quick story about kind of being labeled and trying to help a young man try to navigate the unsafe world that he's already in. So he's coming to our group, he comes religiously, and he's like, hey, Kenton, I'm on my way, I'll be there in like 10 minutes. Okay, 20 minutes goes by, I don't see him. Like, what's going on? I get a call from a friend call. He had just gotten stopped and frisked because he saw 2 officers that he's on his way to group, pulls his pants up because he's like, in one of our groups we talked about, hey, be mindful of how you look because they're gonna kind of stop you perhaps. He got stopped because they said, hey, it looks like you're tucking a gun. So now that interaction for this 17-year-old kid, he doesn't know what that interaction is going to end up like. He doesn't know if he's going to get arrested. He doesn't know if he's going to get assaulted. So that uncertainty completely threw that kid off. But measuring his success, this kid still came to our group. He still made it to that group. And in that group, we were able to talk about that experience, and everyone in the group had a similar experience. So once again, healing is a process. If that young man didn't have that safe space in our program, he may not have even came. He may have just been whatever and went home or did God knows what, because that's a scary experience for anybody. So,
All right.
You've run us right up to the end, so we'll see you in April.
excellent.
All right, so thank you guys both for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.